Elena had exactly $47 left in her bank account. She had counted it 3 times that morning, hoping the number would somehow change. It didn't. The rent was due in 6 days, and she was already 2 months behind. Her landlord had stopped being polite about it. She sat on the edge of her tiny bed in her studio apartment, scrolling through job listings on her cracked phone screen. Waitress, cleaner, delivery driver. She had done all of these before, sometimes all at once, but none of them paid enough. None of them ever paid enough. Then she saw a piano tutor needed for 7-year-old boy. Live-in position. No experience required. Only patience and kindness. She almost scrolled past it. The salary listed below made her stop breathing for a moment. It was more money than she had made in an entire year working 3 jobs. This had to be fake. Some kind of scam. Rich people didn't hire nobodies like her. But desperation does something to a person. It makes you brave in ways you never thought possible. It makes you reach for things you have no business reaching for. Elena applied anyway. She didn't expect to hear back. She applied to dozens of jobs every week and heard nothing. But 3 days later, a black car pulled up outside her apartment building. A woman stepped out. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, and her face showed no expression at all. Elena Reyes? The woman asked. Elena nodded, too surprised to speak. I am Mrs. Park. I manage the household of Mr. Lawson. He has reviewed your application and wishes to interview you. She paused. Today? Today? Right now? The car is waiting. Elena looked down at herself. She was wearing old jeans and a sweater with a small hole near the collar. I'm not really dressed for an interview. Mr. Lawson does not care about clothing. He cares about character. Mrs. Park opened the car door. Are you coming or not? Elena grabbed her purse and got in the car. The drive took over an hour. Elena watched the city disappear behind them, replaced by hills and trees and winding roads she had never seen before. At some point, Mrs. Park handed her something that made her heart skip. A blindfold. Mr. Lawson values his privacy, Mrs. Park explained. The location of his home is not shared with anyone until they are hired. If you are uncomfortable with this, I can take you back now. Elena should have said no. Every instinct told her this was strange, maybe even dangerous. But she thought about her empty bank account. She thought about the eviction notice that would come soon. She thought about how tired she was of being afraid all the time. She put on the blindfold. When it finally came off, Elena found herself standing in front of the biggest house she had ever seen. It wasn't just big. It was like something from another world. Stone walls covered in ivy, windows that sparkled in the afternoon sun, gardens that stretched so far she couldn't see where they ended. This way, Mrs. Park said. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. High ceilings, marble floors, paintings that probably cost more than Elena would earn in a lifetime. She felt small and out of place, like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. Mrs. Park led her to a sitting room and gestured for her to sit. Then she began explaining the rules. Elena would live in the east wing of the house. She was never to enter the west wing under any circumstances. She would teach the boy piano from 9 in the morning until noon, and again from 3 in the afternoon until 5. She would not ask questions about the family. She would not discuss anything she saw or heard in this house with anyone outside. And most importantly, she would not attempt to meet or speak with the boy's father. Mr. Lawson does not involve himself with household staff, Mrs. Park said, her voice flat. He is a very private man, a very busy man. You will likely never see him during your time here. Elena nodded, even though none of this made sense to her. Why would a father hire someone to teach his son but never want to meet them? What kind of parents stayed so far away from their own child? She pushed the questions down. It wasn't her place to ask. "There is one more thing you should know," Mrs. Park continued. "The boy's name is Lucas. He is 7 years old. He has been blind since birth." Elena felt her chest tighten. "Blind?" "Yes, and he has driven away 11 piano tutors in the past 2 years. None of them lasted more than a few weeks." Mrs. Park studied Elena's face carefully. "Do you still want this job?" 11 tutors. 2 years. A blind child who didn't want to learn piano but was being forced to anyway. Elena understood now why the job paid so well. They were desperate. "Yes," she said quietly. "I still want it." Mrs. Park led her down a long hallway to a room filled with light. A grand piano sat in the center, black and shining and beautiful. And at the piano bench sat a small boy with dark hair and pale skin. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. His fingers hovered over the keys without touching them. He looked so small. So alone. Mrs. Park cleared her throat. "Lucas, this is your new piano teacher. Her name is Elena." The boy didn't turn around. "I don't want a new teacher. Lucas, please be polite." "Why?" "She's just going to leave like all the others." Mrs. Park sighed and gave Elena a look that said good luck before walking out of the room. Closing the door behind her, Elena stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Then she walked over to the piano bench and knelt down beside it, bringing herself to the boy's level. "Hi, Lucas," she said softly. "I heard you don't like piano teachers very much." "I don't like liars," he said. His voice was hard, much too hard for a 7-year-old. "They all pretend to be nice. They all say they care. Then they leave." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. She knew that feeling. She knew what it was like to be left behind, to stop believing in people because believing hurt too much. "I won't pretend," she said. "And I won't promise that I'll never leave, because that would be a lie. I don't know the future. Nobody does." She paused. "But I can promise you one thing. While I'm here, I will always tell you the truth. Even when the truth is hard. Even when you don't want to hear it." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. His small hands curled into fists on his lap. Elena could see him thinking, weighing her words, deciding whether to trust her or push her away like all the others. Then, slowly, he shifted on the piano bench. He moved to one side, making room. "Fine," he muttered. "But I'm not going to make it easy for you." Elena smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I didn't expect you to." She sat down beside him, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something that surprised her. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that they were not alone in that room. In the shadows of the doorway, hidden from view, a tall figure stood watching. He had dark eyes and a face that rarely showed emotion. He was the kind of man that others feared, the kind of man who built empires and destroyed enemies without ever raising his voice. Alexander. Lawson had never stayed to watch a piano lesson before. He had hired tutors and forgotten about them. He had told himself that distance was protection, that staying away from his son was the kindest thing he could do. But something about this girl made him pause. Something about the way she knelt on the floor and spoke to Lucas like he was a person. Not a problem to be solved. He watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked away. Telling himself it meant nothing. He was wrong. The first few weeks were hard. Harder than Elena had imagined. Lucas didn't just dislike piano lessons. He fought against them with everything he had. Some days he refused to touch the keys at all. He would sit at the bench with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, saying nothing for the entire 3 hours. Other days he played, but badly on purpose, hitting wrong notes and pretending he didn't know the difference. And then there were the days when his anger spilled over completely. One afternoon, About 3 weeks into her time at the mansion, Elena placed a new piece of sheet music on the piano stand. She had spent the previous night practicing it herself so she could teach it properly. "This one is a little harder," she said gently, "but I think you're ready for it." Lucas didn't respond. His fingers found the first few notes, stumbled, and stopped. "Try again," Elena encouraged. "It's okay to make mistakes." Something in him snapped out without warning. Lucas swept his arm across the piano stand. The sheet music flew everywhere, scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. Then he slammed his small fists on the keys, creating a terrible crash of sound that echoed through the room. "I hate this," he screamed. "I hate piano. I hate this house. I hate everything." His voice cracked on the last word, and Elena realized he wasn't just angry. He was hurting, deeply. The kind of hurt that builds up inside a child when they feel alone in the world. She didn't yell back. She didn't scold him or threaten to leave. Instead, she quietly sat down on the floor among the scattered pages and waited. Lucas's breathing was ragged. His hands were shaking. After a long moment, he turned his head toward where he knew she was sitting. "Why aren't you leaving?" he demanded. "Because you're upset," Elena said calmly. "And people shouldn't be alone when they're upset. The other teachers left. When I did things like this, they all left. I'm not them." Lucas was quiet. His lower lip trembled, just slightly, before he forced it still. "I don't understand you." Elena smiled sadly, even though he couldn't see it. "You don't have to understand me, Lucas. You just have to know that I'm going to be here tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that, too." She meant it. And somehow, Lucas knew she meant it. That was the day things started to change, thought it didn't happen all at once. Trust never does. But slowly, piece by piece, Lucas began to let Elena in. He stopped fighting the lessons so hard. He started asking questions. Small things at first. What color was the piano? What did the garden look like? Was it sunny outside or cloudy? Elena answered every question with care. She learned quickly that Lucas experienced the world differently than she did, and she wanted to help him see it through her words. "The garden has roses," she told him one afternoon. As they took a break by the window she had opened to let in fresh air. "Red ones and white ones. The red ones are the color of strawberries. The white ones are like snow, but softer. What about the sky? Today it's blue with little clouds. The clouds look like cotton balls someone pulled apart and stuck up there." Lucas smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. "You're weird," he said. "Probably," Elena agreed. He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, and the sound filled her chest with warmth. After that, the lessons became something different. They weren't just about piano anymore. They were about connection. Elena taught Lucas to feel the music instead of just playing it. She held his hands over hers so he could feel how her fingers moved. She hummed melodies and asked him to play what he heard. She made up silly songs about grumpy dragons and lonely stars, and Lucas would add his own notes to them, creating something new. He was talented, more talented than Elena had realized. When Lucas stopped fighting and started feeling, his playing transformed. It wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was raw and emotional and full of life. One evening, after a particularly good lesson, Lucas played a piece from memory. It was simple, just a short melody Elena had taught him the week before. But he played it with so much feeling that Elena had to blink back tears. "That was beautiful," she whispered when he finished. Lucas shrugged, but she could see the pride on his face. "It's okay, I guess." What neither of them knew was that someone else had heard that music too. In the west wing of the mansion. In a study filled with screens and silence, Alexander Lawson sat watching. He had installed cameras in the music room years ago, back when Lucas was a toddler and his mother was still there. Back before everything fell apart. His ex-wife had left when Lucas was 2 years old. She couldn't handle it, she said. Couldn't handle having a child who was different. A child who would never see her face or watch her smile. She called their son broken, and then she walked out the door and never came back. Alexander had never forgiven her. But more than that, he had never forgiven himself. Because deep down, in the darkest corner of his heart, he wondered if she was right. Not about Lucas being broken. Lucas was perfect. But about Alexander himself. Maybe he was the broken one. Maybe he was too cold, too damaged, too incapable of giving his son the warmth he needed. So he kept his distance. He hired the best tutors, the best doctors, the best of everything money could buy. But he stayed away, convincing himself that his absence was a gift. That Lucas was better off without a father who didn't know how to love properly. He watched through cameras instead of being there in person. He told himself it was for security, for monitoring, for 100 practical reasons that meant nothing. The truth was simpler and more painful. He watched because it was the only way he knew how to be close to his son without hurting him. But then, Elena came at first. Alexander watched her the same way he watched everyone. With suspicion. With distance. He expected her to fail like all the others. He waited for her to lose patience, to give up, to walk away. She didn't. Night after night, he found himself returning to the screens. Watching her sit on the floor with Lucas. Watching her describe colors and clouds with such tenderness that it made his chest ache. Watching her stay, even when Lucas pushed her away. She was nothing like the women who circled his world. Those women wanted his money, his power, his name. They wore designer clothes and spoke in calculated words. Everything about them was polished and perfect and fake. Elena wore old dresses that didn't quite fit. She laughed too loudly at her own jokes. She sat on floors and made up songs about grumpy dragons. She was messy and real and completely out of place in his marble mansion. And yet she was the most genuine person Alexander had ever seen. One night, long after the lessons had ended and the house was quiet, Alexander made a decision he would later regret. He walked to the music room, not to see Lucas, just to sit where Elena sat, to understand what made her different. On the piano bench, he found a notebook she had forgotten. He knew he shouldn't open it. It was private, personal. None of his business. He opened it anyway. Inside were stories she had written for Lucas, little tales about brave knights and magical forests, with notes in the margins about how she would describe each scene. There were sketches too, simple drawings she must have used to help her paint pictures with words. And then, on the last page, a single line that stopped Alexander's heart. Lucas asked me today what love feels like. I told him it feels like someone seeing the real you and staying anyway. Alexander stared at those words for a long time. His hands were trembling. He couldn't remember the last time his hands had trembled. He closed the notebook and placed it exactly where he had found it. Then he walked back to his empty study in the West Wing, poured himself a drink, and admitted something he had been fighting for weeks. He was in trouble, the kind of trouble that had nothing to do with business or money or power, the kind of trouble that started with a girl who sat on floors and taught his son to feel music, and Alexander had no idea what to do about it. 2 months had passed since Elena arrived at the mansion, and she had settled into a rhythm she never expected to love. Every morning she woke up in her small but comfortable room in the East Wing. She would eat breakfast in the kitchen with Mrs. Park, who had slowly warmed up to her over the weeks. Then she would walk to the music room where Lucas would already be waiting, his fingers tapping impatiently on the piano bench. The lessons had become the best part of her day. Lucas was learning faster than anyone had expected. He had moved past simple melodies and was now working on real compositions. His fingers flew across the keys with confidence, and when he played, his whole face changed. The sadness that usually lived behind his eyes would disappear, replaced by something bright and alive. Elena had never felt so needed in her life, and she had never felt so at home in a place that wasn't hers. But there was always a shadow hanging over everything. A question she couldn't stop thinking about. Where was Lucas's father? She had been living in this house for 2 months, and she had never once seen Alexander Lawson. Not in the hallways. Not in the garden. Not anywhere. It was as if he was a ghost, haunting the West Wing but never stepping into the light. Lucas never talked about him. Whenever Elena tried to bring up the subject gently, the boy would go quiet and change the topic. But sometimes, late at night, Elena would walk past Lucas's room and hear him crying softly. Once, she heard him whisper something that broke her heart. "Why doesn't Daddy want to see me?" She wanted to find Alexander and shake him. She wanted to demand answers. But Mrs. Park had made the rules very clear. The West Wing was off limits. Mr. Lawson was not to be disturbed. Elena was staff, nothing more, and staff did not question the master of the house, so she stayed silent. She followed the rules. She told herself it wasn't her place to interfere, until the night she got lost had happened by accident. Lucas had asked her to find a specific book, a collection of fairy tales that his mother had read to him before she left. He remembered it had a blue cover with gold letters, and he thought it might be in the library somewhere. Elena had searched the East Wing library with no luck. So she decided to try the main library, the big one near the center of the house. But the mansion was a maze of hallways and doors, and somehow she took a wrong turn. Before she knew it, she was in the West Wing. The hallways here were darker, quieter. The paintings on the walls seemed older, more serious. Elena knew she should turn back immediately, but curiosity pulled her forward. She had spent 2 months wondering about the man who lived here, the father who never showed his face, the ghost who watched from a distance but never came close. She turned a corner and found herself in front of a half-open door. Light spilled out from inside. Before she could stop herself, she stepped through. It was a study, a beautiful one, with tall windows that looked out over the gardens and shelves lined with books from floor to ceiling. The room smelled like old paper and something else. Something warm and masculine. And standing by the window, his back to her, was a man. Elena froze. Her heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should leave, apologize, run back to her side of the house before anyone noticed. But her feet wouldn't move. "You're not supposed to be here." His voice was low and cold, like winter wind through an open door. He didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," Elena managed to say. "I got lost. I was looking for a book for Lucas, and the library is in the East Wing." "I know. I already looked there. I thought maybe the main library." "You thought wrong." He still hadn't turned around. Elena could see his reflection in the dark window. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair, but his face was just a shadow. She should leave. Every instinct told her to apologize again and go. But something else rose up inside her, something stronger than fear. "You're his father," she said. "You're Alexander Lawson." Slowly, he turned. Elena had seen his face before, on magazine covers and news articles. People described him as handsome in a cold way, like a statue carved from marble. But seeing him in person was different. His features were sharp and striking, yes, but there was something else in his face that the cameras never captured. Exhaustion, loneliness, a deep, buried pain that lived in the shadows under his eyes. He looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "And you're Elena, the piano teacher." It wasn't a question. Of course, he knew who she was. He probably knew everything about everyone who worked in his house. "Yes," she said. "I am." Silence stretched between them. Elena could feel her pulse in her throat. She should go. She should definitely go. But Lucas's tear-stained face flashed through her mind, and the words came out before she could stop them. "He thinks you don't love him." Alexander's expression flickered. Just for a moment. A crack in the ice. "Excuse me?" "Lucas, your son." Elena's voice was shaking, but she forced herself to continue. "He thinks you don't love him. He thinks that's why you never come to see him. That's why you never show up to his lessons or eat dinner with him or say goodnight." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Alexander's eyes hardened, and Elena could suddenly see why people feared this man. He radiated power and control and something dangerous. "What I feel for my son," he said slowly, each word like a shard of ice, "is none of your concern. It is my concern." Elena's hands were trembling, but she didn't back down. "It became my concern the first night I heard him crying in his room. It became my concern when he asked me why his daddy never holds him. When he asked me if something was wrong with him. If that's why you stay away." Alexander flinched. It was small, barely visible, but Elena saw it. "You don't know anything," he said quietly. "I know a little boy who's desperate for his father's love. I know he's talented and kind and funny, and he deserves so much more than a ghost who hides in the West Wing." Her voice cracked. "He's not broken, Mr. Lawson. He's not damaged. He's just a child who wants his dad." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stared at her, his face unreadable. Elena could see something moving behind his eyes. Pain, guilt, something old and deep that she didn't fully understand. For a long moment, she thought he would throw her out. Fire her on the spot. Have Mrs. Park escort her to the gates with her small suitcase and her shattered hopes. Instead, he spoke so softly she almost didn't hear him. "You should go back to the East Wing, Miss Race." It was a dismissal, clear and final. Elena nodded, her chest tight with disappointment and frustration. She had tried. She had said what needed to be said. The rest was up to him. She turned and walked out of the study, not looking back. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. She had probably ruined everything, overstepped every boundary. By morning, she would probably be fired. But when morning came, Elena was not fired. And something else happened instead. At 7 o'clock that evening, a knock came at Lucas's bedroom door. Elena was there, helping him get ready for bed, reading him a story about a knight and a dragon. Lucas lifted his head. "Who is it?" The door opened. Alexander Lawson stood in the doorway. His face was pale and uncertain, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. He looked nothing like the cold CEO the world knew. He looked terrified. "Lucas," he said, his voice rough. I thought maybe I could read to you tonight. If that's okay." The book nearly slipped from Elena's hands. Lucas didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Small at first, then growing until it lit up his whole face. "Yeah," he whispered. "That's okay, Daddy." Alexander walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. His movements were stiff, unpracticed, like a man who had forgotten how to do this. But he picked up the book Elena had set aside, cleared his throat, and began to read. His voice was halting. He stumbled over words and paused in awkward places. But Lucas leaned against him, his small hand finding his father's arm, and held on like he never wanted to let go. Elena backed quietly toward the door, her heart so full it hurt just before she slipped out. Alexander looked up. Their eyes met across the dim room. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. But in that single look, Elena saw something she hadn't expected: gratitude and something else. Something that made her breath catch and her cheeks warm. She stepped into the hallway and closed the door softly behind her. And for the first time since she'd arrived at this mansion, she let herself wonder what might be possible. After that night, everything changed. Alexander started showing up. Not all the time, and not in big dramatic ways, but he was there. He appeared at breakfast sometimes, sitting quietly while Lucas talked about his dreams. He came to the last few minutes of piano lessons, standing in the doorway and listening. He read bedtime stories 3 or 4 nights a week, his voice getting steadier each time. Lucas was transforming before Elena's eyes. The sadness that had lived in him for so long began to fade. He laughed more. He smiled easier. He stopped flinching whenever someone mentioned his father. And Alexander was changing too. Elena saw it in small moments. The way his shoulders relaxed when Lucas reached for his hand. The way his cold eyes softened when his son played piano. The way he sometimes looked at Elena across the room, as if he wanted to say something but didn't have the words. They didn't talk much, not directly. But there was something growing between them. An awareness. A pull. Every time their eyes met, Elena felt her heart skip. Every time his hand accidentally brushed hers, her skin tingled for hours afterward. She told herself it was nothing. He was her employer, a billionaire, a man from a completely different world. She was just a piano teacher, a girl with holes in her sweaters and $47 to her name when she arrived. Whatever she was feeling, it was foolish and impossible and needed to stop. But feelings don't listen to logic. And Elena was falling, whether she wanted to or not. Then came the Thursday that nearly destroyed everything. It started as a normal day. Elena had just finished the morning lesson with Lucas and was walking through the main hall when she heard voices at the front door. Angry voices. One belonged to Mrs. Park, sharp and controlled. The other was a man, loud and aggressive. Elena moved closer and felt her blood turn to ice. She knew that voice. Victor. Crane stood in the doorway, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the cruelty in his eyes. He was a tall man with slick gray hair and a smile that never reached his face. Elena had spent 2 years running from that smile. "I know she's here," Victor was saying to Mrs. Park. "Elena Reyes, the girl whose mother owed me $200,000 before she died. That debt doesn't just disappear." Elena's legs went weak. She grabbed the wall to steady herself. Her mother had been a complicated woman, loving but reckless. She made bad decisions and trusted the wrong people. When she got sick, she borrowed money to pay for treatments. Money from Victor Crane, a man who called himself a businessman but operated more like a predator. The treatments didn't work. Her mother died, and the debt passed to Elena like a curse. Victor had been hunting her ever since. That was why she moved so often. Why she worked jobs that paid cash. Why she lived in the shadows and never stayed anywhere too long. But he had found her. Even here, in this hidden mansion, he had found her. Mrs. Park noticed Elena standing in the hallway, and her eyes widened with alarm. But before she could say anything, Victor spotted her too. There she is. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Thought you could hide in a rich man's house, did you? Thought that would protect you?" Elena forced herself to step forward, even though every part of her wanted to run. "How did you find me? I have my ways." Victor walked past Mrs. Park into the foyer, looking around at the marble floors and expensive paintings with hungry eyes. "Nice place. Your employer must pay well. That should make this easier. I don't owe you anything. That was my mother's debt, not mine. Your mother signed papers that say otherwise." Victor's voice hardened. "200,000, sweetheart. You'll work it off one way or another. or I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of family you come from. Criminals, frauds, trash. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not ever. I'll tell your precious employer everything, Victor continued, stepping closer. I'll tell him how your mother cheated and lied and stole. I'll tell him the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You think he'll keep you around after that? You think, get off my property. The voice came from behind Elena, cold and sharp as a blade. She spun around. Alexander stood at the top of the stairs. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face completely expressionless. But his eyes were burning. Elena had never seen anyone look so dangerous while standing perfectly still. He descended the stairs slowly, each step measured and deliberate. When he reached the bottom, he didn't stop until he was standing between Elena and Victor, his body like a wall protecting her. Mr. Lawson, Victor tried to recover his composure. I was just explaining to your employee that she has some outstanding debts. I heard what you were explaining. Alexander's voice was quiet, but somehow more terrifying for it. And I heard you threaten a member of my household. In my home, in front of my staff. Victor's smile faltered. This is a private financial matter. No, it's harassment. And it ends now. Alexander took one step closer, and Victor actually stepped back. Miss Reyes owes you nothing. Her mother's debts died with her mother. That's how the law works, and we both know it. You've been chasing a debt you have no legal right to collect. I have papers. Papers that wouldn't survive 5 minutes in court. Alexander's eyes were ice. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this property. You're going to forget Elena Reyes exists. If you contact her again, if you come near her again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will buy every business you've ever touched and reduce them to ash. Then I will have you prosecuted for harassment, stalking, and anything else my lawyers can make stick. And trust me, they are very creative lawyers. Victor's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Do you understand me? Alexander asked softly. Victor nodded once, quickly, then turned and practically ran out the door. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Mrs. Park quietly excused herself, leaving Elena alone with Alexander in the grand foyer. Elena couldn't look at him. Her secret was out. The shame she had carried for years was exposed. She felt small and dirty and completely out of place in this beautiful house. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have told you. About my family. About my past. I'll pack my things tonight. What are you talking about? She finally looked up. Alexander was staring at her with confusion in his eyes. You know what I am now, she said, her voice breaking. Where I come from. My mother was... She made mistakes. Bad ones. And Victor wasn't lying. My family was nothing. Less than nothing. I don't belong in your world. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked her completely. He laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh or a mocking one. It was soft and almost sad. He shook his head slowly. Elena, do you know what my father was? A drunk who gambled away every penny he ever earned. Do you know where I grew up? A 2-room apartment with no heat in the winter. I built everything I have from nothing. He paused. Your past doesn't define you. What you do with your present does. Elena stared at him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Why are you being so kind to me? Because you were kind to my son when no one else was. Because you walked into my study and told me the truth when everyone else was afraid of me. His voice softened. Because I've watched you for months and I've never met anyone like you. Her breath caught. You watched me. Every day. Every lesson. Every moment you made Lucas believe the world could be good. He reached out slowly, carefully, and wiped a tear from her cheek. I've never felt this before. I don't know how to do this. I've spent years building walls, and you walk through them like they weren't even there." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "Alexander, stay," he said. "Not as an employee. Not as a piano teacher." He took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Stay because I'm asking you to. Because I'm too selfish to let you go." She looked into his eyes, this man who the world thought was made of ice. And she saw the truth. He was just as scared as she was. Just as broken. Just as desperate to believe that maybe, after everything, happiness was still possible. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." His smile was small but real. The first genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. And standing there in that marble foyer, with his hand holding hers and her heart beating wildly in her chest, Elena finally admitted what she had been fighting for weeks. She was completely, hopelessly, terrifyingly in love with him. And somehow, impossibly, he felt the same way. 1 year later, Elena stood in a room filled with sunlight, looking at herself in a mirror she barely recognized. The woman staring back at her wore a simple white dress that flowed like water to the floor. Her dark hair was pinned up with tiny white flowers. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall because Mrs. Park had spent an hour on her makeup and would never forgive. Or if she ruined it, she looked like a bride. Because today, she was one. "You look like a princess," a small voice said from the doorway. Elena turned to see Lucas standing there in a tiny suit, his hair combed neatly to one side. He was 8 years old now, taller than when she first met him, more confident. The sad, angry boy who had thrown sheet music across the room felt like a distant memory. "You think so?" Elena asked, her voice wobbling. Lucas walked toward her carefully, counting his steps the way she had taught him. When he reached her, he lifted his hand, and she took it in hers. "I know so," he said. "Daddy told me you're the most beautiful person he's ever seen. And Daddy doesn't lie." Elena laughed, blinking back those stubborn tears. "When did you get so charming?" "I learned from you." She knelt down so she was at his level, just like she had done on their very first day together. "Lucas, I want you to know something. When I came to this house, I thought I was just getting a job. I never expected to find a family. But that's what happened. You became my family. You and your father. And today, it becomes official." Lucas's lower lip trembled slightly. "So you're really staying? Forever?" "Forever and ever. You're stuck with me now." He threw his arms around her neck and hugged her tight. Elena held him close, breathing in the smell of his shampoo and the fabric of his little suit. This boy had changed her life. He had taught her that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing someone even when things got hard. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Park stepped in, her usual stern expression softened by something that looked suspiciously like emotion. "It's time," she said. Elena stood up, smoothed her dress, and took a deep breath. Lucas held out his arm. "I'm supposed to walk you down the aisle. Daddy said it's the most important job." Elena took his arm, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The ceremony was held in the mansion's garden, the same garden Elena had described to Lucas so many times. Red roses and white roses lined the path. The sky was clear and blue with little cotton boll clouds, exactly like she had once painted with words. It was as if the universe had decided to give her every beautiful thing she had ever described to a lonely little boy. There were only about 50 guests. Alexander had wanted something small and private, and Elena had agreed completely. The people sitting in the white chairs were the ones who truly mattered. Mrs. Park sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she pretended not to have. A few of Alexander's closest business partners were there, men who had been shocked to see their cold, untouchable boss fall so completely in love. And Elena had invited the elderly woman from her old apartment building who used to share soup with her when she couldn't afford food. But Elena barely noticed any of them, because at the end of the aisle stood Alexander. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly, but that wasn't what made her breath catch. It was his face. The ice was gone. The walls were gone. He looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever been afraid to ask. Lucas guided her down the aisle slowly, carefully, his small hand steady on her arm. When they reached Alexander, the boy stopped and did something that made several guests gasp softly. He took Elena's hand and placed it in his father's. "Take care of her, Daddy," Lucas said seriously. "She's the best thing that ever happened to us." Alexander's voice was thick when he answered. "I know, son. I know." The ceremony was simple and short. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Alexander's were halting and imperfect, full of pauses where emotion got the better of him. He talked about walls and fear and a woman who walked into his house and refused to let him hide anymore. Elena's vows were about second chances, about a little boy who taught her that patience was a form of love, about a man who seemed cold but was really just wounded, waiting for someone brave enough to see past the armor. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to this marriage, Lucas shouted from his seat, "If anyone does, I'll play piano really badly at them until they leave." The guests laughed. Alexander shook his head, trying to look stern, but failing completely. Elena giggled through her tears. Then came the words she had been waiting for. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Alexander kissed her softly, tenderly, like she was something precious he couldn't believe he got to keep. The guests applauded. Lucas cheered loudly. And somewhere in the back, Mrs. Park was definitely crying into that handkerchief. The reception was held in the ballroom, a room Elena had rarely entered during her time as a piano teacher. Now it was filled with flowers and candles and music. Real music, played by a live band that Alexander had hired. But the highlight of the evening wasn't the band. Halfway through the reception, Lucas walked to the grand piano that had been set up in the corner. The room gradually fell silent as people noticed the small boy taking his seat at the bench. "I wrote something," Lucas announced, his voice clear and confident. "For my dad and my new mom." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Alexander reached for her other hand and held it tight. Lucas began to play. The melody was simple at first, soft and tentative like the first days of their lessons. Then it grew stronger, more complex, weaving together notes that somehow captured everything they had been through. The loneliness, the fear, the slow, careful building of trust, and finally, the joy. Bright and warm and full of hope, it was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever heard. When the last note faded into silence, the room erupted in applause. Lucas stood up and bowed, grinning from ear to ear. Alexander was openly crying now, making no effort to hide it. And Elena was already moving toward the piano, pulling Lucas into her arms. "That was incredible," she whispered. "How long have you been working on that?" "Months," Lucas admitted. "Mrs. Park helped me keep it secret. Every time you left the music room, I practiced." "You wonderful, sneaky boy." He laughed, that bright, pure laugh that Elena had worked so hard to earn in those early weeks. "I had a good teacher." Later that night, after the guests had gone and Lucas had fallen asleep, exhausted in his bed, Elena and Alexander stood on the balcony outside their bedroom. The garden stretched out below them, silver in the moonlight. The roses had closed their petals for the night, and the world was quiet and peaceful. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Elena said softly. "That this is all some dream, and I'll be back in my tiny apartment with $47 in my bank account." Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close against his chest. "It's not a dream. This is real. You're my wife. Lucas has a mother. And I have something I never thought I'd find." "What's that?" "A reason to come home." Elena turned in his arms so she could face him. She reached up and touched his cheek, still amazed that she was allowed to do this. The discarded, wounded, extraordinary man had chosen her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for defending me, for letting me in, for not giving up on yourself. Thank you for not giving up on me." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Or on Lucas. You saved us both, Elena. We were drowning and you threw us a rope. You did the hard part. You grabbed on." He smiled, that rare, real smile that she treasured every time she saw it. "I didn't have a choice. Letting you go would have been impossible." They stood there for a long time, holding each other under the stars. Two broken people who had somehow found their missing pieces in each. Elena thought about the girl she had been a year ago, desperate, alone, convinced. That happiness was something that happened to other people, not to girls who came from nothing. She had been so wrong. Happiness wasn't about where you came from or how much money you had. It wasn't about perfect circumstances or easy roads. It was about finding people worth fighting for. It was about showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. It was about a blind boy who needed patience, and a cold man who needed warmth, and a poor girl who needed to believe she deserved love. It was about someone seeing the real you and staying anyway. Elena looked up at her husband, at the stars scattered across the sky, at the beautiful life she never expected to have. And she smiled, because sometimes the most impossible stories turn out to be true. Sometimes the girl with nothing ends up with everything. And sometimes love finds you in the last place you ever thought to look. All you have to do is stay long enough to let it.